when the Dubrovnik was attacked, it was the sign for the Europe and for the politicians. Yeah. Here is something dangerous. For me, that's the same like when Hitler was attacking Czech. It's necessary to stop this aggression.
The United Nations sent monitors to Dubrovnik, hoping that their conspicuous presence would deter the aggressors. But it was the aggressors who deterred the monitors.
And it was Dubrovnik, I think, that put the war against Croatia onto the front pages of newspapers rather than the inside pages here. And then we shifted and quite often talked about the destruction to the cultural heritage rather than, as we were doing before, was talking to the suffering of the people. If palaces and monasteries get destroyed, that arouses interest. It did not help that the British government, and indeed other governments, saying over and over again, very, very clearly, that they would never risk a single troop on the ground, because what clearer green light or go-ahead could there be for the Serbs in their policy of conquest and aggression than that?
Compared with Vukovar, casualties were small, about 100, most of them civilians. The residents thought it an outrage that anyone should be killed at all. I asked the Foreign Office to send in a food ship. The junior minister, Douglas Hogg, thought it would be an act of war. He had no need to be so timid. The Italians had already sent in a food ship. The Battle of Dubrovnik was one the Serbs did not win. Perhaps they were unaware of just how short of weapons the defenders were. After the siege, I went to Dubrovnik myself. I wanted to find out more about the war and to see what had happened to our friends.
The brigade. Very nice to see you. Thank you for letting us come up here. There wouldn't have been any hope for the city if they got this.
No. It would be, well, we were quite hopeless. With them, say, 500 meters from here, on both sides of the fortress. So this was like an island.
And so how many were you here during the time when they were surrounding it?
There were about 30.
30?
Yes.
30 you held the whole thing?
Yes.
At the...
Much to their dismay.
Uh-huh.
And much to their shame.
This was the place from which the Serbs shelled Dubrovnik day after day, night after night, just down there. They, on this bleak mountain top, they offered an easy target if only some brave men in the West had come to the aid of Croatia.
It could be stopped at that time without any complications. That situation was very, very easy. Now it's more complicated, but anyhow, as a principle, aggressor must be stopped.
Well, it should have been dealt with in a very firm and resolute way at the time that Dubrovnik was being shelled. I mean, the fact is, over Slovenia, there was an excuse for the West to take some action, but they didn't. But when Dubrovnik, which was after all a World Heritage Site, one of the great cities of Europe, was being bombarded by the Serbs, here was the time when we should have said enough, no more. And I had a debate in the small hours of the morning in December 1991. It was the first time the Yugoslav crisis was actually discussed in Parliament, 3:20 a.m. And I urged the Foreign Office Minister to be resolute. Let's have an air patrol, a naval patrol, and let's tell these people that they cannot get away with it. And of course, what happened? There was pussyfooting, there was no action, and so the Serbs felt that they could continue to call the bluff.
The attack on Dubrovnik and the destruction of Dubrovnik was not something that happened, as it were, by chance. It was, after all, one cultural monument that everybody in the West knew. Tourists were aware of Yugoslavia primarily through the images of Dubrovnik, and therefore the Yugoslav army generals knew that This was the test case. If they were going to go away from Dubrovnik after the bombing with impunity, everything else would have been allowed, and indeed allowed.
What do you say about the story told in London and the West that this was a civil war?
That is not true. You know, the truth is that was a mere aggression, because they came like barbarians, plundering, devastating, burning the villages, taking the prisoners, taking minors to the prisoners. Where are the military targets here? Where are the military targets? There is not a single military target in this innocent, beautiful landscape.
Kathy Wilkes sometimes lectures at the Intercity University, so she had stayed here throughout the siege. I told her that our government blames the Croats and the Slovenes for starting the war, that they should never have declared their independence.
Both Slovenia and Croatia were the republics that contributed most to the federal budget. In fact, one of the cruel ironies of this war is that Croatia probably paid for a very, very high percentage of the equipment with which it was attacked. I think that both countries very much resented paying quite so much to keep Kosovo in subjection. Because before the war, in 1990 or thereabouts, about 25 of the gross national product of former Yugoslavia went into keeping Kosovo down. And of course nobody really would wish to see their money misused in such a way.
By this time, people wanted to know whether Carrington had any ideas of stopping the war.
But everything depends upon the ceasefire. And after 12 ceasefires, one cannot be very optimistic that it will hold.
Lord Carrington seemed so unperturbed by the ceaseless breaking of ceasefires that the United Nations sent their own negotiator, Cyrus Vance, to see what he could do. He succeeded in establishing a temporary peace by endorsing the status quo. He brought in United Nations troops to guard the new frontier. This prevented the Croats from retrieving their own territory. Though Milosevic had lost the Battle of Dubrovnik, he had cause for satisfaction. He had conquered a third of Croatia, wrecked its economy, killed over 9,000 people, made nearly 250,000 homeless, had smashed over 400 Catholic churches, and had shown what he meant by ethnic cleansing, which is, of course, fascism. Our leaders realized at last that they had no alternative but to follow Germany's lead by acknowledging what they should have foreseen as inevitable, the independence of Slovenia and Croatia. The Croats were overjoyed to become members of the United Nations.